This is Chapter 10, KAIA. While Ata carried Tawera over his shoulder towards Rindle, I was allowed to be in charge of the hatchet. I spotted low-lying branches and vines out of our path, and the whole time I scanned the treetops and looked for signs that the trees might drop their fronds again. The trees stayed still. The only movement was us and the birds. The further we walked from the Sundana village, Suna, the more my feet wanted to turn around and go back. I felt like one of those magnetic toys Tenuku had in his hut. They came in two pieces that snapped together when you got them close enough. You have to force them apart, like they were never meant to be separated. That was how the village felt to me. It was a part of me. After a while, I was panting and my knees burned, and it took me a while to realize we were walking uphill. The western coast was much higher than our eastern coast and far less swampy. The further we walked, the more solid the ground was, and our feet stopped sticking to the mud with every step. I was glad that we were moving faster, even if it was towards Rindle, because Tawera's face had gone a pale green colour, his lips white. We emerged from the forest onto the crest of a sloping field that led down towards the outskirts of Rindle. The sky was nearly dark and my eyes were heavy. The silky grass looked like the perfect spot to lay down and rest, but we pressed forward and looked down towards the village. Not much of Rindle was visible from here, but the lantern lights mixed with the sea fog above the rooftops created an eerie glow. We didn't know the layout or even where to get in, but we couldn't stay here much longer. What if someone came into the field and saw 3 Sundanas crouched in the shadows? Ata carefully placed Tawera against a tree and looked over the village thoughtfully. Was he changing his mind? I wanted to. I still couldn't believe we were doing this. Are you going down there? I asked Ata. Yes, I'm going to find the quickest and safest way to enter. Stay with Tawera. He crept down the field and disappeared into the dark. Even though I didn't want to go into Rindle, the thought of waiting here while Ata looked around made me feel helpless. I'd started this journey and I wanted to finish it. I glanced back at Tawera. He wasn't going anywhere. Seconds later, I was sliding down the soggy grass, trying to find Ata. He wasn't hard to spot, even in the near darkness. His long limbs didn't hide well, even when shadowed by a hedge that lined the bottom of the field. Lantern light danced through the leaves like bugs darting on the ponds, and voices carried on the wind towards us. I held my breath as they grew closer, but then lights and voices travelled past without any sign that they'd seen us. I let out my breath in a heave of air. I told you to stay with Tawera, Ata mumbled, but it was obvious he realised I wasn't going to sit up there and do nothing. What now? I whispered. Ata pointed a gap in the leaves. I peered and saw a lantern-lit road, made of stones and lined with buildings on the other side. See that one there with the white cross on it? I nodded. Sometimes they'd bring a wagon to Suna with that symbol on it. They'd buy oils from Tenuku. That symbol represents their healers. Ata confirmed what I was thinking. That's their healing hut. We were so close to their healers and getting Tawera help. But even though their healing hut was only just down the road, it wouldn't be simple to get there. This was still Rindle, and we were still Sundana. How do we get there without looking like we're trying to break in? Ata stood, looking back up the hill to where we'd left Tawera, then back through the hedge. We have no choice but to break in. If someone sees 3 Sundanas in their streets, they're going to start asking questions, and they may not be nice about it. We have to get to the healing hut before anyone can stop us. As long as I'd known Ata, he'd never gone against any rule. Not of our village or the Isle. He was willing to break into Rindle and break Isle law to save Tawera. I felt it myself. We were going to do our best to make this work. Let's go. I waited while Ata slogged back up the hill to fetch Tawera, sliding Ata's hatchet into my satchel. The less dangerous we looked, the better. But we weren't going to hurt them, even if it hurt to know they hated us. We just wanted help. Ata was back beside me with Tawera over his shoulder, and the 3 of us hid behind the hedge, nature as our shield. I didn't want to step into Rindle. I wanted to stay concealed, the forest within our reach. But the same forest we had relied on for cover had caused Tawere's injuries and pain. It was time to release ourselves. It was like the street was trapped between day and night. Every few metres the stone buildings were lit up by a lantern, but in between them was a shadowy darkness. I didn't know what it could contain, whether there were people looking out for danger and we wouldn't even make it onto the stones alive. The light was just as frightening as the shadows, though. It meant we would be exposed, that anyone on the street would know we were here. Standing beside an opening in the hedge, I scanned the street. Whoever had been walking past was gone, but I froze as I looked over at the building with the white cross on top. On each side of the door at the top of a stone staircase was a guard, a sword at their sides. "Why are there guards?" I whispered. If this was a place for healing, it didn't make sense for it to need to be guarded. Maybe things were more different in Rindle than I thought. "I don't know," Atta said. I watched as his confidence shattered. "They're going to be a problem." "This way." Atta pointed up the hill where the street curved to the right. We were able to sneak along the front of the hedge, hiding in its shadows. I walked backwards, my eyes never leaving the two guards on the stairs. Atta put his hand out to stop me when I hit the edge of the shadow. There was no more hedge, and we were faced with buildings on both sides of the street. Atta readjusted Tawera on his shoulder and darted out into the road. He slid between patches of light, keeping to the gaps of darkness in between. I followed, ducking low as if that would help keep me hidden, and slammed into the wall beside him. My heart pounded in my chest. We were really doing this. We were inside Rindle. The building we hid in front of loomed over us, its dark grey stones cold against my arm. The building with the white cross was only a few down from where we were standing. "Slowly," Atta said. I didn't move as he stepped out of the shadows, one arm wrapped around Tawera, the other raised above his head. There was nothing else he could have done, but the guards saw him instantly, and I felt like the world was falling apart. "Halt!" they shouted, their voices booming out into the street. I wanted to run, but I knew if I did, I might not make it back to the field. "We are only here for help," Atta called, his voice shaky. Sweat was dripping down his forehead. "Put the body down and raise your other hand," one of the guards started down the stairs towards Atta, pausing at the bottom. The guard pulled out his knife, holding it in front of him. Did they really think Atta was carrying a dead body? Did they think he had done something to Tawera? Atta scrunched up his face. I could tell he didn't want to put Tawera on the ground, but he didn't have a choice. Keeping his hand raised, he bent down and lowered him onto the stones. Once his other hand was in the air, the guard stepped closer to him, his face taut. "We don't help your kind here. State your true business in Rindle." "I'm speaking the truth. This boy is dying and he needs help." The guard scoffed. "Are you making demands of me, Sundana?" The other guard shook his head. The first guard crept forward, extending his sword towards Atta. He had a thick beard and moustache, but underneath it, I could tell he was only a few years older than me. Atta took a step back. "Don't move," the guard yelled. "Mirren, get back up." The guard at the top of the stairs nodded and slipped through the door to the healing hut. "We don't want any trouble, please." Atta's chest rose and fell rapidly. The bearded guard walked closer to him and stood right over where Tawera lay crumpled on the ground. If he'd just looked down at Tawera for a second and seen his wounds, he would have known Atta was telling the truth. It was like he didn't want to look, like he refused to see what was in front of him. "You're part of a race that tried to kill my people. Why should I believe anything you say?" He stepped forward. "You will never destroy my people, not you or any poison you may have." He extended his sword towards Atta so the blade rested against the bottom of his chin. The tip pressed into his neck, causing Atta to wince. "Don't touch him," I screamed, coming out of the shadows. The guard's eyes widened and he stepped back from Atta. He hadn't been expecting me. Atta swallowed hard and let out a long breath. The tip of the guard's sword swung aimlessly between Atta and me, like he couldn't decide which one of us was more of a threat to him. "Stay back, don't come any further." He couldn't hide the fear in his voice. The doors burst open and a line of guards jumped down the stairs, yelling at us to keep our hands in the air. Almost every part of me wanted to refuse, to try and run, but then that would mean that no one was going to survive this, not Atta, not Tawera, and not me. I slowly lifted my hands, making sure to glare at each of them as they formed a tight circle around all of us. We didn't want trouble, but that didn't mean I had to agree with what they were doing. Even once they had us surrounded, with both of us on our knees, they still yelled commands at us. "What's going on?" a voice called from the steps, but I couldn't see who it was through the uniformed men that looked down on us. "Get back inside, Doctor," the bearded guard called over his shoulder. "Who was on the ground there?" the man said. "Get your hands off me." Suddenly, the circle split open and an older man, maybe only a few years younger than Tanuku, appeared in front of us. He wore a long white coat and wiry glasses. He looked from Ata, then back to me, and down to Tawera on the ground. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked the bearded guard breathlessly. "They are not permitted in our village, Doctor. An intelligent man like yourself must know the reasons for that all too well," the guard said staunchly. "I know the rules of this town, tenant," Doctor snapped. He bent down in front of Tawera. A deep frown spread across his thin brows as he took in the wound on his neck. "How did this happen?" he asked Ata. Ata was shaking, sweat dripping down his face. He opened his mouth to speak, and all that came out was a croak of air. "He was attacked in the forest," I answered for him. The doctor pursed his lips and glanced behind us up towards the forest. I thought as much. Shaking his head, he turned to Tenet. "Fetch a nurse and Dr. Parnell, will you? And allow these people to lower their arms." Tenet looked down at us on the ground, then back at the doctor. "The police commander will not be pleased to hear of this." "Stand down then, men," he muttered to his guards. They put their swords away and moved away. A couple of guards stayed near us, but most of the others marched back into the building. Ata lowered his arms and put his hand behind Tawera's head, supporting him on the hard ground. "So you will help him?" Ata asked. The doctor nodded, a tiny nod that could have been mistaken for a mere twitch of his chin. For Tawera, it meant his life might be saved. I squeezed my eyes shut, letting out a shaky breath. "Thank you," Ata sighed, like he was letting out the last of his energy. I couldn't quite believe it. This Rindle man would help us. He glanced over at me. "And what of the girl's arm?" I lifted my arm and took in the trail of dried blood along the back. I'd almost forgotten about the slice from one of the fallen fronds. "I'm fine," I said. As much as I was relieved we could get help for Tawera, I didn't want anyone touching me. All I needed was some water to clean myself up, and that could wait. Another man in a white coat stormed out of the building and down the stairs. A girl in a white apron with a red cross on the front scurried behind him. "Are you sure about this, Calloway?" he asked the older man. "No, but I'm not leaving them." With his hands on his hips, the younger man stared down at us. Eventually he sighed. "Millie," he said to the girl, "get a stretcher and find a spare room." The girl's eyes widened, but she nodded and hurried away. The girl returned and Ata helped the men in coats shift Tawera onto a thin cloth stretcher, just like the ones I'd seen in our healing hut. But that was the only thing that was the same about their healing hut. The building felt unnaturally cold on the inside, and the outside world disappeared behind the dark stone walls with no windows. No one said a word as we carried Tawera along the hallway. The girl peered down at Tawera with wide eyes, like she wished she could let go of the stretcher and run away. She didn't even look at me, but I could feel that my presence here was making her nervous. I wondered how she would handle what we'd just been through in the forest. But I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not her or even the man who had nearly sliced Ata's neck open with his sword. We turned a corner and walked down another corridor and stopped in front of a door at the end. There was nothing but a bed inside, which we placed Tawera on top of. The younger man stared down at him and scribbled something on a piece of paper he pulled from the pocket of his white coat. "Stay in here, please," the older man said with concern, like we might try to run off. The two men left the room with the girl, and then it was just me, Ata, and Tawera. Ata stood by Tawera, his hand on his shoulder. There were no chairs, so I sat on the floor against the wall. I tugged my legs in and wrapped my arms around them. Each piece of me was crusted with mud. Even my hair had leaves and twigs stuck in it. A rush of tiredness overtook my need to stay awake for Tawera. I'd been holding on all day, looking for Dad, helping Tawera, running for my life. I'd come so close to never going home again, of never seeing Mātai again. I was so far from him now. I woke from an uneasy nap, my head resting on my knees. Ata had moved away from the bed and leaned on the wall across from me. His weary eyes didn't move from Tawera. We waited. I was getting hungry and there was nothing left in my satchel to eat. I poured the last drops of taro juice onto Tawera's wound, but nothing changed. So much time passed that I thought that they'd forgotten about him and how sick he was. We'd done everything that we could, but it wasn't enough. Tawera was dying. We have to do something, I said. We can't, KAIA. It's a miracle we've made it this far. I know it's unfair, but while we're in their village, we have to play by their rules. I didn't like their rules. Maybe it would have been better if they had turned us away. We could have tried to get Tawera home to Suna. Even if he had died on the way, we wouldn't have been sitting here like prisoners with a death sentence. Finally, the door swung open and the younger man in the white coat came in. A man in a tight suit stood in the doorway behind him. He had thick eyebrows that reminded me of caterpillars, and a balding head that created its own light source in the reflection of the wall torch. "You need to come with me," the balding man said flatly. Ata looked to the man in the white coat. "Are you going to help the boy?" The man didn't respond, only stepped aside so the balding man could enter the room. "The boy can stay for now. You two need to come with me." I looked at Ata for what to do. I wanted to yell at these men to help Tawera, or else we'll just go and find what we needed ourselves in their dim, cold healing hut. Ata walked to the bed and took Tawera's limp hand in his. He stroked it gently with his thumb before placing it back on the bed and stepping away. He nodded to me. It was time to go. I looked over at Tawera. I didn't want to leave him here, but we had no other choice. The young man waited for us to leave the room, then shut the door with him still inside. The balding man turned to us and held out a scroll for Ata. Ata looked down at it with confusion, but went to take it. The man just smirked and pulled it back. "Don't worry, I'll read it to you," he snickered. "It is a crime to enter our village without a predetermined reason and permission from Mayor Brindlewood, the head of police, or at the direct request of the king. Therefore, you are hereby banished from the Rindle village and must return to your village immediately or face imprisonment. From the office of Mayor Brindlewood." A few hours ago, I might have been pleased to be kicked out of Rindle and sent home, but now, with Tawera in that room with a healer who didn't seem to actually want to help him, it seemed wrong to go. Thankfully, Ata felt the same, despite what he'd said about following their rules. "We can't leave him," Ata pleaded. "The boy might die. He can't die alone." The suited man gained a surprised yet amused look. Then his eyes turned dark and he stepped right into Ata's face. "I'd be careful what you say to me. I have the power to make things very, very bad for you." Ata swallowed and nodded, but I could tell he was desperate to stay with Tawera. The man took a step back and looked at us both. "For some reason, the doctors have taken pity on your boy. You, however, have 10 minutes to leave this town or face arrest and a long, bumpy ride to the royal prison. We have arranged guards to escort you to the gate, and then you can find your own way back to your village." He rolled up the paper and gestured towards the hallway we'd come in down. The guard that had held the knife to Ata's throat was standing smugly by the main door. A man wearing a jacket rimmed in golden ribbons stepped forward. "Move it," he spat at us and shunted Ata down the stairs. Ata stumbled but managed to land on his feet. A few snickers rose out of the group of guards standing by to watch us leave. This was entertaining for them. It wasn't just the guards in the street now. There were other people walking past from further up the hill. Everything about them was stiff, from their clothing to the way they walked. Many of them glanced at us as they passed, but averted their eyes and moved swiftly away, as if they didn't want to see. I spotted a man walking swiftly down the other side of the road, and once I saw him, I couldn't look away. He wore a tight grey suit and carried a leather suitcase, like most of the other people walking by. But this man wasn't like them. He had deep brown skin and curly hair. Even though his hair was cut close to his head, there was no mistaking it. He was Sindana. He was one of us. "Hey, over here," I called to the man. He looked over and stopped in surprise when he saw Ata and me. I don't know what I expected him to do, but I hoped there was a chance he could help get the guards to let us stay. Only another Sundana could explain how important it was for other people to not let one of their own die alone. But he looked away and kept walking. He pretended he hadn't seen us, just like the others had. "Hey!" I called again. "Enough!" a guard barked in my ear. He went to grip my arm, but before he could put his hands on me, I tore away and tore off down the street after the Sundana man. "Stop her!" one of the guards yelled, and footsteps pounded on the stones behind me. Utter called my name, but I didn't stop. The man I was following turned and looked at me in horror as I gained on him, and he broke into a run. He was fast, but so was I. The guards were close behind me, but I still had a chance. I had to get to him. I had to talk to him. That's the end of the chapter. Tune in a few days' time for the next one. Bye.